Hello everyone, and joining us today. In case you don't know, my name is Rory. I'm the head of sustainability here at Recora. And today we're going to do the webinar on waste and recycling legislation. Lauren might also be joining us today, but she's having some technical difficulties. So hopefully if we can get past that, she'll join. But if not, I'll run us through the webinar today. So like I said, I'm the head of sustainability here at Recora, and then Lauren, and today we're just going to run through kind of upcoming waste and recycling legislation that's on the horizon, that has been in the works, and different things. So we'll talk about the Environment Act, which got passed a few years ago, and then we'll highlight some real key things that are coming up and how that is, why that's happening, and also how that's going to impact you. And then we'll have some question and answers at the end. But before we start, we just wanted to put out a bit of a disclaimer. So what we're going to talk about today is waste and recycling legislation that is in the pipeline, that is coming into, that we believe is coming into law at a certain point. None of what we've said is confirmed. It is all in the planning stages. The Environment Act was passed a couple of years ago, and it laid out the foundations for these upcoming rules and laws to come in, but none of these have actually come in. So I don't want you to take what we're saying as the gospel truth, but take it as this is what is coming up in the horizon to the best of our knowledge, to what's happening in the industry. These are things that will happen, and we've kind of put some rough dates beside them to when we think they're going to happen. So just a little disclaimer at the start, just to make sure you know kind of what the lay of the land is. Because if you'd seen the Rishi Sunak speech at the end of last week, when he talked about how councils were going to have the councils were forcing you to have 7 unique bins, and how he just scrapped it. Now, that was never a law to start with for it to be scrapped, but that just kind of lays out kind of how fickle kind of the waste and recycling legislation has been over the last few years, and how it can change quite quickly. So just what we're putting out to you today is just kind of an overview of what we expect to come up in the next few years. So to start with, we've got the Environment Act. So in 2021, this was passed, and this was kind of once we left the EU, we didn't have our own laws, so this kind of replaced that. And then also there hadn't been an update to the waste and resources strategy in about 18, 19 years, and this was going to do that. So this was kind of laying out what the next steps were for that. The main thing with that is that the recycle rate target is going to be increased. They're really aiming for 65% in 2030, and that kind of is the foundation of all the actions that we're going to talk about moving forward. So the government has set a target to be household and commercial waste to have a recycling rate of 65% by 2030. Now in 2021, it was 44%. So and I'm sure you're all aware of, involved in recycle rates in your building, and you know how hard it is to increase your recycling rates from X to Y. So to go from 44% to 65% in 9 years is not an easy feat. So there is going to need to be big wholesale changes for us to achieve that. And with this target, because it's household and commercial, we believe that the commercial aspect of this are going to be asked to maybe hit 75%, and then the residential waste at 55%, for example, because it's so much harder to get recycling rates at residential up to a higher level, that commercial are going to be targeted a bit higher. So the main takeaways, not the main takeaways, but just some things to highlight from the Environment Act, and we'll talk a bit more about these as we go along. You've got the extended producer responsibility. So the producer of packaging, so if it's a plastic bottle made out of plastic, or a piece of paper made out of paper, there's going to be more responsibility on those producers to either make sure the item is recyclable, or make sure it's being made from recyclable materials. Deposit return scheme for drinks containers. You might have seen this in the news very recently. Up in Scotland, they launched it, but then put a halt to it And the idea being that your plastic bottle is worth 20p and you deposit it back and you get your 20p back. And we'll talk a bit about that later on. Plastic tax, how there's going to be a tax around plastic use in items and packaging, consistent labeling, bans and charges on certain materials. So if you think about disposable single-use plastic cutlery and things like that, and then also a much more rigorous tracking of waste and recycling. So fly tipping is still a very big and dangerous issue in the industry. So there's going to be a much more rigorous tracking, and especially as new legislation comes in, you need to be able to report and track on making sure that you're adhering to the new legislation that's coming in. So that's just an overview, and then now we're just going to kind of dive into a few of the big aspects of this and kind of ones that are going to have a big impact on you. So the first one is the waste incineration tax, and that is a tax that waste incineration is going to be part of the EU emissions trading scheme. At the minute, it is currently exempt. And what that emissions trading scheme is basically if you produce carbon dioxide, if you produce greenhouse gases, you're only allowed to produce X amount of emissions. If you produce more as a manufacturer, if you produce more, then you need to pay to produce more. If you produce less, then you can sell off your tons of CO2 that you haven't produced. It's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but waste incineration has always been exempt from that, but it is going to come in, and we think this is going to come in around 2026. And the reason for this is because incinerators produce a large amount of CO2. Here, just a little stat, it's the same as homes, offices, transport and industry in Manchester and Birmingham put together. So it is a large amount, and that is just the incineration that happens in the UK. There are other organisations that transport their waste and recycling outside of the UK to be incinerated, and that's not factored into that number. And how this is going to affect you, we think now, again, like I said, the situation is very fluid. The 2026 is kind of a year that's been put out, but might change. And this number, this cost, but we think it'll probably add around £50 a tonne to the disposal of general waste, which works out about £2.50 per 1100 litre general waste bin. Obviously, they're very generalised numbers and figures, but you can see that £2.50 for an 1100 litre bin is a fair whack on top of that cost. So the cost of disposing of general waste is going to increase significantly, and we think in the next few years or so. Forgot to say at the start, if you have any questions as we go through, please put them in the question box or in the chat, and we will try and answer them either as we go or at the end. But yes, please put forward any questions that you have. Next thing, deposit return scheme. I touched on that at the start, how it was happening in Scotland. And so each devolved nation in the UK has its own responsibility for this. So Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, England. We think it'll come in England in 1st of October 2025. And the idea is that all PET bottles, so like your plastic water bottles, steel aluminium cans that are of a relatively small size, well, up to 50 litres, but not your large industrial drums, will have a value attached to them, and then you will deposit them and you will receive a monetary value. This is only for takeaway venues. So if you buy a drink in a restaurant, then you won't be the same. But if you buy it in a shop and take it away, and the big aspect of this is that off-site retailers who sell drinks will be obligated to host a return point. So if you are a shop that sells plastic water bottles, there will be an obligation. This is the wording at the minute, that you have to host a return point. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you have to have one in your shop. You and shops in the area can have one, could potentially have one return point to use, but you are obligated to have a return point. That is the current situation at the minute. And reason why is every year UK consumers go through around 14 billion plastic drink bottles, 9 billion drink cans, so that's quite a lot. And this deposit return scheme does help increase recycling rates, But not the main, but one of the bigger aspects is around litter. So if you know that plastic bottle has a value attached to it, well, then you can then get money on that. You're less likely to chuck it on the street and more likely to put it in one of these return points. And just how it will work in general is you'll buy the drink, you'll pay the deposit when you buy it, and then when you return the packaging, you will get that money back. And then just a few stats. So how the recycling rates for drink containers are around 70%. And then in Germany, where they currently have the system, they're above 90%. So it does have an impact with the recycling and also on the litter as well. Okay, so another big thing that came in the Environment Act was around food waste regulations. So it is currently not compulsory in England to separate food. It is in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, another devolved issue. But the government have pledged to reduce food waste by 20% by 2025 and eliminating all food waste from landfill by 2030. This was in the Environment Bill. And how that's going to be done is they're going to collect food waste separately from all households, businesses, and organizations. Excuse me a sec. Sorry about that. So what they're going to do is separate food waste collections. And reason being is that 33% of all food produced globally is lost or wasted every year, and that's across the whole supply chain. So whether that's in the production of the food or in your household, and the food when it's disposed of in landfill, that's why they want to eliminate it from landfill by 2030, is that it generates a lot of methane. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's very dangerous in the short term. And in this period of change that we need, we really want to eliminate as much methane as possible. So that's why food is a big issue. And kind of the rules and how this is going to be implemented, the general idea at the minute is that any organization or business that has more than 5 people will have to have a food waste collection where it is economically and feasible to do so. So there will be exemptions. But generally speaking, you'll have to have food waste collections. And kind of going on the back of the landfill tax and increase in general waste, food waste is a very heavy waste material. And if you can get it out of your general waste and put it in a food waste bin, it does save you a lot of money. And especially with general waste increasing, it will have a big impact, not just on the environmental side with saving those methane emissions, but also on the economic side as well. And then you have the extended producer responsibility cup take back scheme. So this is the idea around coffee cups, and that the same idea with the deposit return scheme, that how you would need to have a point in which you can return your plastic bottles. It'll be mandatory take back requirement for fiber-based cups. So this means, again, any coffee shop or sellers of cups that employ 10 or more staff will be required to provide a dedicated bin for the separate collection of cups. So any coffee cup in 10 staff isn't a lot. And let's say Starbucks, for example, they might have less than 10 staff in one store, but because Starbucks has more than 10 staff, that one store will still have to have a collection point. Again, the rules around this about whether it needs to be one per shop or there can be one central point for places is still up in consultation at the minute. But this is something that is coming in. We think this will come in at some point next year. And again, this is to remove coffee cups from being thrown away in general waste. They're very hard to recycle because they've got the paper around the outside and the plastic lining on the inside. They cannot be recycled in your mixed recycling stream because of the systems, and they need to be separate. So this will mean a much bigger increase in recycling of the coffee cups. And I said at the start about how waste tracking and reporting is going to be a big element of this around the coffee cup scheme. You will have to monitor and report on the coffee cups that you sell and the coffee cups that you collect and things like that. And we have been working with our IT department to make sure that we have this reporting tool and weighing system, and we can put it on our portal for this. So we are confident that whenever this does come into regulation, we will be able to report the necessary results to the regulators around these coffee cups. And what it means for business, I've kind of touched on it, is that they will need to have a coffee cup bin, and they will need to be able to report on these statistics. So kind of spoken about different aspects there, and there's a couple more I'll just touch on at the end, but kind of I said around the recycling rate was the big target, but there are other targets in which the government wants to put forward. And in 2027 targets, so they want to reduce food waste produced per person by 50%. They want to reduce plastic waste produced per person by 45%, reduce paper and card waste produced per person 26%, reduce glass waste produced per person by 48%. So there's lots of targets that the government have put out. There hasn't been too much action in place from the government in which they're able to achieve these, but we think that over the next handful of years, these actions will start coming in. And with, I mean, I'm probably preaching to the converted, but changes within buildings, within the industry is slow moving at points. So if this is coming in 2024, which is only 3.5 months away, well then, you know, you might need to start making those changes or start talking about those changes 6-12 months in advance. So actually, if you look at it in those time scales, then these changes are going to be quite imminent. And the final two things just wanted to highlight, and those previous ones I've spoken about are quite like there's a lot of work that needs to be done, both from the legislation side and whenever they're put in place. These two are a bit simpler, let's say. So labeling, there's going to be consistent labeling on all packaging. So you might recognize these symbols that have started appearing on packaging over the last 4 or 5 years. And this is going to be mandatory that all packaging is going to have these. So it's going to have a nice green circle that's going to say recycle. It's going to have a nice black symbol with a line through it that says don't recycle. And it is going to be, yes, you can recycle. No, you can't recycle. And this fits into the part of the wider consistent recycling agenda that DEFRA is currently putting together. And what it is doing, and it is stipulating that all waste management companies, councils, buildings, whoever, must recycle these materials. So it must recycle plastic and must recycle paper, must have the ability to recycle cardboard. And that is where Rishi Sunak's, when he said about having 7 different bins. Now, the idea of having 7 different bins has never been on the agenda, but having different waste streams in which must be able to be recycled is coming in. And but how they're collected is still up for debate. So there might be 7 different waste streams like plastics, tins, paper, glass, whatever. Excuse me. But they might not need to be collected in 7 different bins. You could put plastic and tins together. You could put paper and cardboard together, etc. So it is going to eliminate the postcode lottery of can I recycle this here? Can I recycle it there? You know, depending on where you live, where you work, things like that. And then also means the labels will be correct. If it says it can be recycled, then no matter where you are, if you're at home, at work, if you're in Scotland, if you're in England, whatever, then you will be able to recycle it. But the labeling around the bins might still be different. And that is kind of it with the legislation that we wanted to go through. Like I said at the start, hard to give lots of detail around this because there is still a lot that is up in the air. But just wanted to highlight the different bits of legislation that were on the horizon, just so you had an overview of what was coming up. And the and not to kind of speak too much in detail, because I don't want you leaving here today thinking, oh, this is coming in exactly 1st of January 2025, so we need to do X, Y, and Z. There are still some things up for debates, but we at Recora will keep on top of it as much as we can. We have our owners and our directors sit on many different boards and groups and consultations to make sure we're on top of all this. But just to give a nice overview of what we are doing. So if you have any questions following that, then please put them in the chat. And I'll try and answer them as best I can. Sorry about that, I got the September cold. So, will the waste incineration tax impact the WTE industry or individual biomass incinerators and boilers? I don't know if individual biomass incinerators are gonna be impacted. On one hand, you could see, well, why wouldn't they be impacted? Because if it's the same thing happening, but there will be exemptions. I think they want to target the big emitters of the carbon. Maybe if you're below a certain threshold of emitting CO2, then you would be exempt. So I would say small individual ones probably wouldn't be impacted, but any sort of larger energy from waste plants would be. When/if will councils be required by law to recycle food waste? So yes, councils will be required by law to recycle food waste. When that will be, we think it'll be at some point next year that it will come into play. But like I've said with these other laws, that was stipulated in the Environment Act that was in 2021 that this would happen. So that was already 2 years ago. There may most likely be an election at some point in the next 6 months, which could then change who the government is, and therefore that might push things back, might accelerate things, and so on and so on. We think it'll happen in the next 12 months, would be the best educated guess that we have. So, oh, Lauren has answered that. That's good. Regarding labeling, is there official graphical guideline for bins? Is it available? In terms of labeling, those two labels that I showed on the screen, they are the labels that would be used. So if you were looking to make your bins have the same labels as they are on the packaging, then those two labels will be the labels being used. So if you want the guidelines, I'm sure officially they haven't been, maybe they have officially been launched. So if you Googled them, then you would be able to find those graphics, but they are the ones that are going to be used in the labeling. So if you wanted to use them on your bins, those would be the ones to use. So we struggle to have 7 bins inside and outside of our building. What would you suggest to help us recycle as much as possible? So having 7 bins, because the idea that source segregation is the best thing to do. If you can source segregate, then it means the item that you dispose of has a much better chance of having a second life and being recycled. So we always encourage it. Obviously, it is not always feasible to have lots of different bins. The main ways in which, if you do have limited space, would be to make sure all the dry materials are together and all the fiber materials are together. So fiber materials, I mean by that is sort of your paper and cardboard. You want those to be together. And then dry materials, so like your plastic, your yogurt pots, your cans, things like that, should be together in a bin. It's not necessarily vital to have paper and cardboard separate, or to have plastic and tins separate. We can separate them at our materials recovery facility, but kind of, and making sure food is out, even though it's not a legal requirement at the minute, like I said before, about the economics of it and the environmental aspect of it, and making sure you have food separate as well, because then it's less likely to contaminate all those other items that's being disposed of. Am I correct in assuming no extra funding is being assigned to help implement these changes at a council level? I don't know. I'm sorry, Matthew, I'm not sure what the funding around these changes will be, and I would hesitate to say that the government knows exactly what funding is going to be available for these changes as well. So I apologize, I don't know what funding is going to be available for this. Can we get a copy of the presentation? Yes, I will send out a copy of the presentation and also the recording of this as well. And then please feel free to pass it on to whoever you want. Will be capacity for our account managers to visit individual contracts to see what we need to be capable of meeting these targets. Yes, please, if you need help in talking more about these targets or more about these legislation changes, then please get in touch with your account managers or our help desk, and we'd be more than happy to try and set up a meeting with you and help you achieve these things. Can you clarify the food waste collection responsibilities for businesses? So the responsibilities for businesses in terms of food collection will be that you have to have a food waste bin on site if you have more than 5 employees. So the vast majority of people will have to have the ability to collect food waste. Now, when we say food waste, we mean any sort of scraps that are on plates, any sort of food that's gone off out of date, anything that you could have put in your mouth plus tea bags. Then you can put that in the food waste bin, and the responsibility will be that the business has the ability to collect that food waste and to dispose of it as food waste. What about food waste and incineration? If a business waste goes to incineration, not landfill, yes. So even if your food waste is currently going to incineration and not to landfill, you will still be obligated to have a separate food waste collection that will be sent off and disposed of as food waste. At Recora, we send it to anaerobic digestion. So think of it like a big stomach. You put food in, then lots of heat and gas is released, and that's used to make energy and electricity, and then any digestate that's left at the end is then used in the local agricultural industry, but it can also be disposed of as just compost as well. But no matter where you send your general waste, you will have to have a food waste bin. Aluminium foil, recyclable. Aluminium foil, not really widely recycled. There's very low value in aluminium foil, and also it is normally covered in food and oil and different things. So aluminium foil is not largely recycled. Will companies be asked to use councils for certain collections, or can they continue to use Recora? No, businesses will not be asked, or companies will not be asked to use councils. I'm sorry if I've maybe used councils a bit too much, but when I say that, I mean that just kind of everyone will be more under the same umbrella. So councils use commercial waste management companies to do their waste and recycling. We don't, because we don't do any residential waste. We just do commercial waste. But if we did do residential waste, then we could be collecting council waste. So no, there won't be any changes around who you can use. It will just be more of a one size fits all in terms of the rules around. There will be more synergy between what councils collect and what your offices collect, because waste management companies will all be under the same umbrella bracket. So with the two graphics, would that mean separation of streams would not be necessary? Grant, I apologize, I'm not sure what you mean by that. I apologize, but I've following this. If you want to send me an email, and or we can set up a call and I can talk to you about further, but I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. If there's any other questions or thoughts, then please let me know. But like I said, I'll send out this presentation and the recording, and if you've got any follow-up questions after that, or any colleagues have any questions, then please let us know. We're also doing another webinar next month for World Food Day, so please look out for that. Do you think same standards for businesses recycling will be applied to households soon, as in the case of parts of Northern Europe? Yes, so the same standards for business recycling will also be applied to households. So the standard that the government puts out will be the same standard for businesses and the same standard for households. So it will be one standard for everyone. So yes, it will come together, and that should make it easier. And there won't be the postcode lottery of, depending on what street you live on, determines what you can and can't recycle. It all should come under one. Okay, well, if there's no more questions or thoughts, like I said, this legislation is still in the consultation, still in the planning, and things can still change. But the direction of travel is that these ones that we've highlighted today will happen. Whether it's exactly as we said they would happen, might be different. Is it gonna happen in the next 12 months, 2 years, 3 years? The jury is still out on that, but please take note of these changes and start having thoughts, conversations, discussions about, if you don't currently have food waste, if you do have lots of coffee cups in your coffee shops in your building, start having those conversations about how you can implement these when they come around. In terms of fines, I don't know what new fines there will be. I'm thinking in terms of our clients, what fines people will incur. I guess if you don't have a food waste service, then what fines would you incur? I apologize, I wouldn't know what. I'm sure there will be fines, but what that will look like, I don't know. As a business in a multi-occupied building, how do we work with landlords to provide these services? So one of the issues with waste and recycling in different buildings, or in London and multi-tenanted buildings, is that there's so many different stakeholders involved, and to try and get things done is often complicated. With a landlord or with an owner, I would tell them that it is the legal obligation to do these things. So therefore, you're not coming at them saying we want to do these things. It's more of this is a legal obligation that is coming in, and therefore we need to do it. And then I would say that's the best way to get the conversation started with that. But again, if you want our help with this, then please get in contact with our help desk or an account manager, and we'll be able to help you as best we can. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. Like I said, I'll send this out. We're doing a webinar next month for World Food Day, so please look out for that, and we'll make sure everyone gets invited for that. If you have any other thoughts or questions, then please feel free to email us about it. There's our email address at the bottom, sustainabilityteam@recor.co.uk, and you can follow us to keep up to date with all the different things as well. But thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.